Welcome to the Sound Meets Sound podcast. My guest this episode is Matt Latham, creator and host of the Pick a Disc podcast. Enjoy.
I don't know the demographic of your listeners, but as you can tell by my accent, I'm from good old Blighty or Britain. I'm from the centre of Britain, so a place called Birmingham, which Ozzy Osbourne, UB40. That's where I live. I grew up in just slightly north of it in a place called Walsall, colloquially known as the Black Country, which was a place of like a lot of industrial stuff. So I kind of migrated south 25 miles to where I am now. I am pretty much a kind of I tell people to turn computers off and on by day, in IT support, and then at night I'm either watching live music, podcasting, playing narrative games, or running. That's the cheat sheet version of me.
Do you remember the first album that you like non-child album, like the first maybe in your teens that you got?
In terms of kind of albums, I can remember, I think I was 10 or 11 when I had my first CD player for Christmas. And I remember when I had that, I had 2 CD singles. I had now I don't know if they ever made it to America, but there was a boy band called Boyzone. They had a song called like "So Good," which I had the CD single of. I suspect that my parents just bought it as a 1 or 2 type thing. And the other single that I had for Christmas was "Universal" by Blur. I don't know what it must have been, just like 2 for 1 thing that they found when they bought the CD player. But at the same time, I had 2 compilation albums. I had Hits '96, which was that series always numbered the year the next year from when it was released. So it was December 95, and it had all the hits of like 95 or the latter half of 1995, but it was called 96, and the greatest hits of 1995 as well. And there wasn't that much crossover of them actually, so I had quite a lot of kind of compilations of the first things that I had with the CD player. But the first actual album I think I can remember possibly having, I'm 90% sure it was Fuji's The Score, which I had about like at 10 or 11. And I still, to this day, remember the first time getting the CD, playing it, and it had the parental advisory sticker on the front, and I'm like, ooh, like 10 or 11 goes, ooh, like that, and I put it in, played it, and I don't know if, are you familiar with the album at all?
No, I don't think
No.
so. Yeah.
Well, it's like Lauryn Hill, Wyclef Jean, Praz. So it's the 3 of them, and it opens with a skit where he goes like, "Hello everybody, welcome to our feature presentation, Fuji's The Score, and now for our feature presentation. Yo, I was F-bombing with the other day, and I never ran so fast to turn something down." That was the first time I ever experienced swearing in an album, which I think was like one of the first albums. The hell, I was like, what the hell is going on? So I kind of attribute that as perhaps the first album that I had that was technically mine. That wasn't a compilation or like CD singles or something that I borrowed off my parents, that were like cassettes and stuff. So Fuji's The Score for an 11-year-old was probably the start of it anyway.
Have you listened to The Score recently or since you were that age? And
I think so. I think I remember me getting asked a similar question, I think on another podcast a couple of years ago, or at least I was primed that I was going to be told about that, and I was like, I've not listened to it for a while, and I did re-listen to it, and I think for the most part it kind of does hold up, and there are still some songs there, and I was quite surprised at how much that I remembered, and like in a post many decades later teenage Matt being obsessed with rap music world, so it kind of had a nice kind of nostalgic hit to it.
how did that music speak to you?
I've not really given this much thought, but I do know that I was really into rap music when I was a teenager, to the point where I remember year in, year out asking for these kind of rap albums and getting them for Christmas. And it was only until much later that I realised that my parents had to have gone to HMV and asked for and I really wish I was there when my mum had to ask, do you have Crazy Bones Thug Mentality in 1999? Which But I don't know what it was. I don't know. I think it was perhaps just like a case of just being quite formative at the time. Where I mean, the score's a mixture of kind of rap R&B, kind of like soul influences with a bit of kind of post kind of West Coast rap style kind of samples and that kind of stuff. And I don't know why I just liked it, but I think it might have been the case that I was kind of really got really into kind of the delivery of stuff, and even pop songs. I was kind of I really liked the kind of pop songs that had rap verses in them or something like that.
Yeah.
And and I don't know, but it only really kind of kicked in, I think, a bit later on. I think when I was about 15, 16, and this is going to be the most predictable response, Eminem came out.
Cool. Okay. So, and then another first, I'm all about origin stories on this podcast. So, the first live show you went to, again, like maybe not like a school trip, but like the first one that you were like, I'm going to go to this show because I like this band and, on your own steam kind of thing.
This is where this kind of gets quite long-winded. I got a long-winded answer to this.
Go for it.
So, because I think it surprises a few people in that, in the space of, I have 3 first shows. So kind of like the first kind of gig or concert or whatever I went to was when I was about 14 or 15. The family went as part of my sister's Christmas present. The band, I don't know if you've ever heard of the band Steps or the group Steps.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a post Spice Girls world. So like I think there was a kind of a surge of girl groups and boy groups came out, and you had some that mixed both of them together, like S Club 7, or like Steps and stuff. And Steps were very much kind of like aimed at a slightly younger market, because my sister was absolutely obsessed with them. Actually, to be fair, my mate Addis, who's older than me, was obsessed with them as well. But and I think that they played in Birmingham, like in 2000. Everything went to the family and stuff, and I still have kind of vivid memories of that. So that's kind of like the first show and stuff. But that was the only kind of time I remember kind of going to something like that on that scale. Then my first gig, like proper first gig, I was 18, and this was May. I think it was May 2004, so I was 18, and a little known band called the Killers was touring kind of like smaller venues. They was promoting the re-release of a small single called Mr. Brightside. And I mean, I don't know how big it was in the UK, in the US, but in the UK, I think it still lingers in the top 100. It still charts after about 20 years.
At least in New York City, it was huge. You heard it at every bar and party.
Yeah, I mean, there's technically, I think it could be my favorite song ever, but I do fully understand when people say they can't stand it or they are sick of it. I fully agree with that, but it might be my favorite song of all time. But I went to go and see them. So I went to see them. And it was kind of like the first like gig of like I went to and stuff, and it was in a place called the Carlin Academy 2, which was in Birmingham, and it was like a bigger kind of venue, but then they had a smaller venue upstairs. And I remember kind of watching the band there and stuff. I remember Brandon Flowers walking past us at one point. I've got a very bad picture that I took on a flip phone that I had of Brandon Flowers outside that. Yeah, looking like almost infantile at the time by that point. But I remember kind of get like liking one of the support bands, and then it was like, and then I remember kind of the band started, and suddenly I was just getting in this kind of weird kind of, what's going on? People around me were pushing into me and stuff. I was like, what the hell's going on? I must have gone into the mosh pit and not realised it at that point. I do remember getting quite claustrophobic, buying a bottle of water and then like popping to the loo just to get some air at one point. Yeah, it had that much of an impact that the next gig I went to was 5.5 years later. Yeah, so my final first gig, and this is the kind of thing that I find that people kind of, when I speak to people, and if they know me through the shows that I've been to, the gigs I go to, or have followed me since, all this kind of stuff, is that kind of technically my third gig or show or whatever, or my first third gig was in 2009 when I was like, I just turned 24, so like I kind of missed all the teenage kind of going to gigs and stuff, and never really went to any gigs at that point. But that was a band called Los Campesinos, which they and because when you talk about origin stories, how you got interested in that, and I'm very much very similar vein when it comes to pick a disc. I love kind of going into that kind of vein of stuff. One of the things I quite like looking at when I talk to people on pick a disc is the idea of kind of milestone bands, or kind of like bands that kind of change, or moments that change you, or kind of set your music taste on a like divergent course or whatever. So hearing somebody tell me about the Killers when I was 18 in the sixth form common room at school on the radio, that was the song that got me from rap music to indie music. And seeing the band Surfer Rosa, who was a Norwegian band supporting the Killers, they got me onto the searching around the internet kind of things and stuff. And I went into a massive phase of listening to Scandinavian indie synth bands for a while because I was just finding things online. Because of that, I remember getting into the TV show Skins, and they had an emphasis on kind of like music from MySpace and around MySpace and stuff. And I loved searching around on MySpace and everything. And like I used to kind of craft fake soundtracks for TV shows or films. But I'll be looking at like the unsigned stuff of MySpace and like, oh, I like that song, and creating these kind of fake soundtracks, and the majority of the songs aren't on Spotify, but I think they're on YouTube. I think one of them survived. I've managed to get one left. There's like a whole YouTube playlist of one kind of fake film soundtrack that I made. If I find it, I'll send it you. But in the process of that, I found this band called Los Campesinos, which one of the songs that played through was a song called My Year in Lists, and listen to that song, and there was a lyric in there saying, I cherish with fondness the day before I met you, and for some reason that just clicked. And I think I've often said I was a late bloomer in certain things, and I think my music taste is kind of like one of the things that late bloomers, where people say like, oh, your teen years or your late teen years is your formative years. I hit mine in my early 20s. I hit my kind of music taste in the 20s, and Los Campesinos sent me down a rabbit hole, which I think still has an impact today. And I was like, I got obsessed with this band. I need to see this band. And they weren't playing anywhere in Birmingham. They was playing in Manchester, which is about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes drive away from me, which in comparison to the US is probably not that much, but in the UK it's in the UK that's a road trip. That's a road trip you got to prepare mentally for. And I'm like, I need to see this band, to the point where like I'd only gotten my first real car for the first time a few months ago, and I hadn't really driven. I was only driving to and from work and never really made any kind of like quote unquote longer journeys on it. But I ended up driving all the way to Manchester and driving all the way back. Like the first time I made a journey like that to watch this band, and that was the gig that kind of opened the floodgates. That was the awakening of sorts. It felt like this something that perhaps was dormant in me in terms of like liking live music, and like something unlocked during that gig. And then for the next kind of few years, whilst I'm not at the frequency I seem to be gig going now, I was slowly going to more and more shows. I started making friends I started meeting people who were kind of either promoted gigs or new musicians, and started going on to more kind of other shows and stuff. It all kind of started with that first gig. So yeah, so I always feel kind of weird when I get asked that, what's your first gig, because it's a very complex question. And I have been talking for about 10 minutes about it, so it's...
Oh, that's great. It makes total sense why you would think of them that way. Because the first one, it's like kind of more for your sister, like, and then the second one sounded really overwhelming, but also significant because that band and that song were so huge. But then, to have the first gig, like you said, where you have like an awakening, and you're like, oh, this is my music. Yeah. Which is an amazing feeling to have when you finally hear your music that speaks to you. So you kind of alluded to this, but you kind of feel the same about Los Campesinos, their music?
Yeah, I think they've always kind of I think the age of the band members, I think they might have been either the same age as me or the year below the academic year below me, I think. So I'm either about the same age or 1 year older than them.
Mhm.
So I kind of you kind of grow up with them and stuff, and as their music has kind of evolved and perhaps gone slightly more kind of emo or kind of like more alternative emo influenced. I kind of grew up with them, and whilst their kind of music now perhaps isn't as much as perhaps isn't kind of like what I'd consider as my main taste now, there are still elements of their sound and some of their signature sound that's like that they still put in their new music now. I think last year they released their first album, 7 Years, and there are still elements like sonic elements in that album, which I think kind of like trigger dopamine in their longer term fans. And like, yeah,
Mhm.
this is still Los Caminos. They've kind of had a natural kind of progression that you don't feel like they've made a drastic change, and
Yeah.
they still can kind of make stuff that like speaks or appeals to me in that. So like yeah, so I have the vinyl for the new one on like a little shelf in front of me. You can't see it on the
Mm.
camera, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
staring at me at the moment.
Well, yeah, the next thing I had on my list was your spreadsheet. And I just love to hear when you started it, why you started it, like what information does it have on it?
So I think when I first kind of started going to kind of gigs after the after the Los Caminos one, I think I went to another one in 20. Yeah, I went to I think to see another band. I think in 2009, in the November, because the Los Caminos one was in October, and the Sounds was the band The Sounds is what I went to see on the 21st. It was a case of like I had no way of tracking which gigs I was going to go to, and it wasn't to fulfill a very early obsession with spreadsheets that I do have now, but it was a case of just keeping track of what gigs I was going to, and perhaps and then as I saw, okay, I've got this on this date, and these are playing, and I think after like one or two, I thought, oh, I'll make a note of who's supporting, because I remember like on the Sounds, which is like technically gig 3 on the spreadsheet after the Killers, Lost Comes on the Sounds, because I don't put the Steps one on there. I was like, I
Mhm.
remember getting really liking the support act for the Sounds, which was a band called Matt and Kim,
Mhm.
which I think they're New York. I think they're a New York based duo. I
Oh,
think.
oh,
Um,
okay.
and I remember kind of afterwards, kind of talking to Kim of the band and buying a CD, and I still got a photo of me and of
Oh,
Kim on that.
cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of like the first photo of me in a. There's not many. There's not many because I learned very on that I don't photograph well. Um, I can't pose properly. But yeah, so I got there's a picture of kind of me and Kim, which is like one of the first gigs I went to, and I thought, okay, I'll keep notes of who was supporting stuff, and it was pretty much a case of just keeping track of what gigs I was going to,
Mhm.
and I was like, okay, yeah, and then eventually just start getting. I just kept adding to it, and I don't think I added. I don't think I like in the next year or so. I probably wasn't as strict with it as I am now, because
Mhm.
I've recently found that I'd missed a few kind of earlier gigs that I'd not put in there, but there was a combination of that, and then by the time I got to about 2011, no 2012, I discovered Instagram, and
Mhm.
I got my kind of personal account at the time. I started like taking a photo of like every kind of set that I saw, to the point where
Mhm.
like if you see, I mean it's a private account, but if anyone adds me, if you don't look like a boss, I'll probably let you follow me. Um, like you go back, and I think it's not all the gigs, but like from about 2012, yeah, 2012 onwards, I think you'll start to see kind of photos of each of the sets I've been to, and there's a combination of that and the spreadsheet where I started to kind of feel like there's a log of gigs that I was going to, and eventually, I think at one point, I about 6 or 7 years ago, migrated from Microsoft Excel to Google Sheets with my Gmail
Mhm.
account, purely because all the pivot tables I started to do updated automatically rather than having to manually refresh them in Excel. Um, I've always, as part of my job and stuff, I've always had like a keen, like slightly beginning understanding of a language called SQL, which is how you can manipulate data, and started incorporating SQL queries into the database. Found out via kind of AI how to create unpivot tables in the unpivot tables in Google Sheets with code, to the point where now like the tables that I've got now move. There's this piece of code that takes all the tables, puts everything in a single thing, and I start getting all stats like how many
Right.
times I've seen stuff, and yeah, and
Nice.
that's how it's kind of grew into what it is today. And okay, so the second part of your question, which is the kind of information that it holds, then like it's so at the moment it kind of still kind of with the combination of this and a kind of task app I've got, kind of keeps me in check of which gigs I kind of want to go to. From about 2015 onwards, I started adding the price of the tickets. So and to kind of tell me how much I spent, I ignore that column because I might just I really ignore that column. But yeah, but it tracks down the venue, the location, the price, the type of gig as well. So it'd be a gig whether it's a festival day, and the headliners and supports, and it breaks down to kind of by year. So I've got a sheet of like everything from the beginning of everything. So like a running total. I've got one where I can select the year and it'll give me stats for that year. And it breaks down by how many per month. How many kind of band sets that I've seen, regardless of the supporting or headlining, the amount of headline slots, the amount of times I have been to certain cities, certain venues. On the expansive ones as well, I've got to the point where like it'll tell me the months that which month I saw the most gigs in, and interestingly enough, to 2025 I broke that record twice. The record, so the record was 9 in 1 month,
Mhm.
which was
Wow.
which was joint between April of 2023, May of 2022, and November of 2015, and it's February this year and May of this year I broke it. So February I got 11, and May I got 12. Yeah, but then as well with a mixture of kind of like concatenation commands and stuff, I've got lists of what's the most I've seen the same artist in a singular month, in a singular year, and in a singular venue or in a singular city and stuff, like, yeah. So I can tell you, for example, there was well, at the time he was quite a young lad, I think he's just like 17 or 18, who was like supporting a few friends that were doing. So there's a guy called David Young, and
Mhm.
in 2014 I saw him 6 times in a year, because I think he was supporting quite a few times. Where I can tell you that I think in the most times I've ever seen someone in a single city is a singer called Charlotte Carpenter in Birmingham, 17 times. But in total I've seen her 22. But 17 have been in Birmingham, and she's the artist I've seen the most in Birmingham. So yeah,
Oh.
and there's I've got break. I've got sheets which tell me if I choose which venue. I've got like a chronological list of the headlining and support sets I've seen in a certain venue. Like the venue I've been to the most is a venue called the Hare and Hounds, which has a English Heritage badge on for being the first gig that UB40 ever performed at. So it has that kind of stuff. So I can tell you like the dates of like all the 98 times I've been to that venue. And the
Wow.
same with bands as well. I can select the band, and I can it gives me the amount percentage that I've seen them headline each time I've seen them. Yeah, and the final thing, which is only new for this year, is that, and I've got no idea why I've done this, but I've also got, because you got headliner support, support 2, and support 3, and all that kind of stuff. I've also got a league table which counts the amount of times I've seen a band headline, and it attributes like 15 points to that, 12 if they was first main support, or if they were like first day on a and a festival where I saw 10 bands, they had 1 point and stuff, and purely because I've got bands that I've seen more, but I've not seen as many headline sets as other bands. So
Oh.
so I've kind of made that kind of weighting of it. So, like, for example, the band that's in first place with 273 points is a band called Boat to Row, which I've seen headline 11 times, but main support was 6 times, and a few others later on in the festival. And then second place is a local band called Johnny Foreigner, who I've only seen 19 times, but have headlined 15. Third place,
Ah.
Charlotte Carpenter, I've seen 22 times. She's the most I've seen joint with Boat to Row, but she's third because Johnny Foreigner I've seen Johnny Foreigner headline more, even though overall I've seen them less. If that makes any sense, it's just
Yeah.
it's weird, but I think it kind of balances out the kind of, okay, I've seen this person's support or lower in the bill more than I've seen a certain band headline, but I've seen them headline more than them. It kind of adds a bit of
Yeah.
weighting to it. So
I was not expecting that much detail, like not detail, but like that your use of it went into that much detail. Like, because I was like, oh, it's just a list and a spreadsheet. It's
well,
like you've got pivot tables and weighting and all this stuff. It's really amazing.
I'm kind of obsessed with my Last.fm account as well. So I kind of religiously make sure that I kind of, like, I listen to Spotify or streaming services quite a bit, and that they've got a log on Last.fm. But then even if I listen to MP3s, my MP3 player on the computer links to Last.fm. If I listen to a vinyl record, I manually go and use a site to manually scrabble the vinyl listening, so I get an overall view of what I've been listening to. I've kind of been, I don't want to say it's weird, but I've always been quite fascinated to kind of been able to kind of track kind of trends and stuff, and I've always been fascinated with being able to I've always been fascinated with data, so I quite like the idea of being able to see, be able to look back and say, oh, I was listening to them over a certain amount of time, or or if there's an artist that's quite high up in my Last.fm, I click on them, but I've not listened to them in a decade because I listened to them non-stop like 10 years ago, and they're still quite high up. I'm fascinated by that because you can track your tastes that way, and the same thing happens with the gig spreadsheet because I was looking back and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of folk musicians in the 2012s to 2014, a lot of acoustic gigs, a lot of folk punks. But then I kind of started getting into kind of indie grunge music, or and a lot of non-male vocalists type bands and stuff. Like, a friend of mine described it, my music taste, as a bunch of angry lesbians, which isn't completely false. Like, quite the scale of quite non-male LGBT artists that I've listened to, who kind of politically kind of fueled in their music from about 2015 onwards. You can kind of see them are starting to appear more, and the only way you can kind of see that trend is for me looking back and just seeing that, and I do quite like being able to go back and just see that how my tastes have changed, and it's there in data and stuff, and but it's also just nice to like go back, and same with the Instagram as well. You scroll back and you're like, oh, I've forgotten all about that, or I see on the spreadsheet, oh, I saw so and so at that point, I don't remember that. I look down and the only picture I've got is the picture that I took for that Instagram. I'm like, oh, I remember that now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, having the picture to complement the list, yeah, is huge, because then
Yeah.
it's like, oh, that venue, oh, that, yeah.
Yeah. And what I found as well is that, strangely enough, because the Instagram algorithm for people that post stuff annoys me at times. Like it's definitely, when I started to pick a disc, I was getting a lot more. It was easier to find. Like, you could go on hashtags and
Yeah.
sort by chronologically. You can't do that anymore, and I've noticed a
Right.
lot of engagement has dropped and stuff, and particularly with
Yeah.
stories as well. Like, you barely get like 5% of your followers looking at your stories. There's only a couple of instances I remember when it was abnormal that I had a lot more people see stories. It's always been when I start posting screenshots of the spreadsheet rather than screenshots about anything else to do with the podcast. Or randomly, because of my kind of obsession with New York, or kind of my love for New York, when Mandani won. I put a message congratulating Vandal on his win.
I saw that.
Yeah, and yeah, you saw that. Yeah, like that's the
Yeah.
first time I ever got triple figures on a story. And
Wow.
yeah, like everything else, I struggle to get over 30 on story views.
Mhm.
So I've started to try and figure out now. Like you probably see this over Christmas if anyone who follows the Pickadisc account. They might see a bit of like spreadsheet or data get thrown in between advertising the podcast because that seems to trick the algorithm to get more people to view it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, it is. Instagram's maddening that way, where when you try to post about the thing you do, like crickets, and then you post some random thing, like, like a random carousel or something, and then it's like all of a sudden Instagram says, "Oh, well, that's interesting. People should see this."
well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's slightly odd tangent, but I think this is kind of relevant, particularly as a podcast about music as yourself. So, I mean, how long have you been going on with Sound on Sound?
I started this in 2016,
Oh,
so.
okay. So it's been longer. So because I started in 2019, when I started to pick a disc back then, Instagram, you was able to kind of put the hashtags, and then you could go through chronologically. So if you say, oh, you click on the music podcast hashtag,
Mhm.
you could see all the latest posts. And I used to just click on that, and I used to follow. I discovered a lot of podcasts and people that I probably still connect with now by clicking on that hashtag and just following a bunch of podcasts. And that was the easiest way to network with other podcasts. And one of the quite a few of like kind of around like after the like halfway through the first year, and for a good chunk there was other music podcasts as my kind of guest base. So quite a few of the guests I found that way, and
Mhm.
quite a few shows no longer. I kind of outlived a few shows, and quite a
Mhm.
few of them I kind of like really miss desperately.
I was curious how you decided to start podcasting, and if you had, because there is a moderate amount of like audio engineering that has to happen, and you have to know like what a microphone and an interface are and all that stuff. So how did you get into all of that for Pick a Disc?
Okay. I try and speed the intro bit up. So many many years ago, almost 2 decades ago, I was a part of a kind of amateur online screenwriting community where we would delve into a very niche kind of thing called virtual series. The concept of virtual series or virtual spin-offs and stuff, there would be like a mixture of either original ideas or fanfic spin-offs. So
Mhm.
like, and people would either write prose or write scripts, like actual like TV or scripts formatted stuff, upload them
Yeah.
as PDFs on a weekly basis as like virtual TV programs. Um, and like there were, I knew I had friends. I kind of met people online through that. My friend Tony, who kind of, I met my friend Tony, who he kind of he was a massive X-Files fan. He ended up writing a 5-season kind of PDF script series
Wow.
called The DSR, which was a spin-off of the TV show Alias. However, it would be now. Do you know do you know Alias, the TV show
Yeah, a
Alias?
little
Jenna
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, imagine that mixed in with the X-Files. So it was spies that would deal with like vampires and werewolves and supernatural things, but it was
Yeah.
set in the same universe as Alias. I think at some point we kind of, I don't know how, we kind of experimented with kind of doing like kind of audio kind of commentaries on them as well, or like podcasts and
I
stuff. And
see.
this was like Skype based
Right.
kind of chats
Yeah.
and stuff. And in 2015, or it was when it was around the time that I think they did the season 11 of the X Files. My friend Tony kind of created a show called the X Cast, where he kind of spoke and went through all the X Files stuff, and I went on that a couple of times. Before then, he experimented with a couple of other ideas, and he had a show called Pick a Flick, because my friend Tony was very much into films. So, and the format of Pick a Flick was that people would suggest films for two random people to kind of discuss, and I was on that a few times. So like but the way that worked, there'd be two films that they kind of talk on one episode, but the guests would be watching them based on other people suggesting them. I went on a few. I remember being on an episode talking about like I think Spice World, the movie, one about
Mm.
South Park and airplane and that kind of stuff. And I remember kind of saying, "Oh, do you want to try? Do you want to do backdoor pilots? Do one about music? We can call it Pick a Disc or something like that. Try that." So there's an episode of Pick a Flick called Pick a Disc where someone I think I can't remember the name of the person, but his online username was Weak Lemon Drink. Chose Nick Cave's Murder Ballads, and me and my friend Lee spoke about it, and that audio still exists. And that was in 2015, and to the point I always had that audio. And when I moved house in 2019, I actually put that audio on the main feed because to try and keep the schedule whilst moving house. So if anyone wants to listen to like a 29-year-old me, like not very much, very very green with podcasting, like have like really doing a bad job about it with really low quality audio from a Skype conversation. Episode 11 on the Piccadis feed with the Murder Ballads by Nick Cave. You can listen to that, and I cringe listening to myself. I struggle to listen to my old episodes with me in them. It's usually a case of listening back, edit, and then never listen to them again. But
Yeah.
when I listen to
Same.
that, I just see so many bad things that I know that I've kind of gotten, many habits I've gotten out of. But anyway, that lasted. Then I did that episode. Then I did a second episode with another friend of mine about Counting Crows, August, and everything after, and then stopped. So just stopped and just didn't do it. This was in 2015. My mate Tony kept doing a few other podcasts and stuff, and kept trying. Yeah, just try something. I had a few attempted TV related podcasts because to this day I still feel like I struggle talking about music on a certain level, which is why I'm always guest led and get them to talk most of the time. I had one TV podcast idea, and I still love this idea. But it's just very, and once you hear the premise, it's very much an admin nightmare. But there are elements of it which make sense when you think of Pick a Disc. So it was called Your Perfect TV Show. So I would speak to a guest, and we would then go through 4 of their favourite TV shows of all time. However, we had to start from the most current and then go backwards chronologically, and they could not overlap. So my friend Tony, for example, he talked about the Game of Thrones, Lost, Alias, and the X-Files. But then the second half of the podcast would be me then taking elements of those 4 TV shows and then on the spot improvising a new TV show for the guest in the effort. So finding out what commonalities are in those 4 TV shows they watched, and then creating a brand new fictional one for them. Now that was the bit that took ages, and I loved doing it. It only lasted 3 episodes, but what I really quite liked, though, I found, is that I really quite liked the first bit as well. Loved the second bit. It was just too much work. But the first bit of going back and finding out why they liked the TV shows, why they found out, what the commonality of it is and commonalities between them, figuring out their taste and how it affected their taste in TV. I was like, that kind of stuck with me. Then I started listening to a few other podcasts. There was 2 podcasts. One called Don't Get Me Started, and another one called Guilty Pleasure. Don't Get Me Started was, I think, Anthony King and Will Hines, who I think are new West Los Angeles based kind of comedy writers. I think Will Hines was kind of like an actor as well, and they spoke to people not what they do, but what they love. So they weren't allowed to talk about anything that they would do. They can only talk about things that they love, and they have guests talking about thrifting. They have guests talking about weird hobbies, about live action role play. There was one episode where a guy just spoke about his music collection and how he listened to it, and he had a kind of OCD style method of going through every single album he owned on a schedule. And
wow.
Yeah, but I really like that because they spoke about what they kind of loved and not what they did, and focused on what they liked and that sort of thing. Guilty Pleasure was something very similar, where people were just speaking about their guilty pleasures or their kind of hobbies that they want to do. There was an episode about someone who really liked eating fast food in the shower. Somehow there was an hour episode on that.
Wow.
Yeah, there was, and this was from again, I think they were New York based, or no, they were LA based as well, but I think one of them was from New York. Jackie Ray Bell and Amanda Salvatore, who are comedy writers. And there was and that both of their structures kind of spoke to me in terms of that they focus more about what the guest really liked and what they kind of loved. And and I remember this episode vividly. There was a whole section where one of the hosts, Amanda, one of the hosts of Guilty Pleasures, they had a moment where they spoke about their own kind of what was happening before they spoke to the guest. And I think they had an episode where it was just the two of them, and she spent about 20 minutes talking about Amanda, like that she'd never really been to a gig or a show on her own before, but she really liked the singer Alex Leahy, who's like an Australian kind of indie pop singer who I love as well. And she told the story about her of kind of going to this gig on her own and kind of combating this kind of like nerves and stuff. And they had a section in the middle where I think Amanda was saying about this story about of like what happened at this gig and the relationship, and like it was like a transformative moment for her as a music fan, and she kind of gotten over a kind of anxiety about this, and I was like, and I was hooked on that, and I still remember that episode. I only listened to it once, and I need to re-listen to it actually, but that kind of stuck with me, and I love that story. And this was, and then my mate Tony was kind of like who keeps trying to get me to do podcasts and stuff. I was like, no, you know what? I think I want to do Pick a Disc again. And this was late 2018, but I want to change something like from what's different from Pick a Disc. I want the guest to pick the album because if the guest picks it, then it's something that's connected to them. They've got a reason they want to talk about it, and I'm not trying to find guests the whole time looking for them to, like, oh, so and so wants two random people to talk about an album. I think no, the guest is going to be one album and an episode. The guest's got to pick it, and I want them to be about that and stuff. And then when I've had musicians come on and stuff, I've always said that they're not allowed to really talk about their own stuff. And that was from Don't Get Me Started, which is like not about what they do, but what they love. And I'm like, yeah, and the same kind of the same thinking goes into my other podcast, which is Ask Us About Loom, which is about adventure games. I've had developers on there, and I've said that you're not allowed to talk about your own stuff. They want to go as a fan first,
Right.
And as soon as that clicked, I'm like, okay, this might work. And then I think in the December of 2018, I kind of had a call out, and couple of friends said, "Oh, I'm planning on doing a couple of episodes of this show. Anyone interested?" Kurt North, who was a regular host of the Xcast, who knows Tony, was my first guest picking U2's Acton Baby. My friend Kaylee, who I've known on like my online pen pal. Although she might listen to that, I think she might listen to that, or both be insulted and agree about Pain Pal. But yeah, she was my second guest talking about Say Anything, and then randomly on Twitter, I made a call out, and then someone who I put on a gig like about 7 years beforehand, someone called Helena Deegan, was my third guest. And on that episode, she chose Phoebe Bridgers' Stranger in the Alps. And I asked her the question, how did you discover the band? And she told the story about walking around a park in London, and then like the Spotify randomly played the song Smoke Signals on, and then like she described in kind of detail this kind of like the feeling that this like random song had, and then she just got obsessed. And that was the moment I thought, okay, I think this show has mileage as opposed to all the other attempts that I've had. And I'm like, this is the kind of thing that I need to work on. And then by then, I think then about a month later, it was January, in 2019, released the first show. Like then I think the fourth episode was a guy called Colin, who hosts I think the We Dig Music and the Free With This Month's Issue podcasts, who I'm now on a music podcast network with, and he's like he's one of my best friends. That he started through, and then it just escalated, and yeah, then it just all seemed to click at that point. So it's a very long-winded answer to that question, but that's the kind of genesis of how Pick a Disc has formed today. And I think as throughout the 6 to 7 years that it's been going, Like a lot of the main structure has been very much the same. I think a few things has tweaked. Episodes are now twice as long as those first episodes. The first, like the episode with Helena about Phoebe Bridgers, was 40 minutes long, whereas now it's an hour and a half. But like it pretty much like very much came, and very early on, a lot of the structure and beats that I hit kind of remain from where they was there from like about 7 years ago, with half the length of the episode.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense that you started with something that you were able to just basically maintain with a few tweaks, because it's very well. I love that Pick a Disc was a backdoor pilot on another podcast. That's a great origin story. And also, yeah, the fact that you had tried out a few things, so you were already honing your craft as a podcaster, basically podcast host.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, you're really into analysis. Like you're into data and analysis.
Yeah.
And now I feel really bad about bringing Midnight Flowers for my episode, because I remember you were like, there's no data. Like this band is like too unknown that it was like struggling to find data for them.
But I still think that episode I felt still worked, because I think one of the things I found with Pick a Disc as well is that I've had musicians on who talk about music in a certain way. I've had music fans like yourself, well, a musician yourself as well, but who have also speak about music in a certain way. But I've also had non-music fans, or people whose music isn't their primary kind of focus as well. And I think the way that I think Pick a Disc works is that if I'm able to kind of pick, like, okay, the guest can probably talk about things like this in a certain way and stuff, and but then okay, maybe a musician will probably want to talk more about this. Whereas I think quite early on, I think we ended up speaking, and quite a lot of the episode ended up being about bands that should have made it. And I'm a big fan of related tangents. So I've had episodes where we've talked about writing like tangents and stuff, but they've always been spun off by something about the album. So even though we didn't have any data, I've kind of like, and I think as a job as a podcaster is to try and being able to like prize out content that, okay, the hook for this episode is the conversation about bands that should have made it. And because you raised that question, and I was like, right, okay, I might not know that much about the band, but we can spin on that and make it on that. And I think there's a bit of flexibility, even though it's quite rigidly structured. I think there's a bit of flexibility in the combination of that, because I think the second ever episode with my friend Kaylee talked about Say Anything and Max Bemis. Now Max Bemis was diagnosed as bipolar, and the guest was as well. And we ended up having a brief chat about, like, kind of informing me about a bit more about how bipolar is and stuff, and why that she related to that kind of act and stuff. There's like episodes about we've had episodes about like the Love Actually episode. We talked about the difference between the US version of that soundtrack and the UK version. So even though I might not be able to kind of get enough kind of data or a lot of research on stuff, there's a lot more interesting things that can be brought out of it. One of my favourite episodes, actually, there was a comedy writer called George Chen, who I kind of met through a podcasting Facebook group, who picked an act called Monotrona, and Firebird and Hawkeye and Firebird, and it's an 8-track EP of a female comedian who dressed up as a samurai, sung with a baby voice over sampled Commodore 64 soundtracks. In a really, and the quality is really low, but we ended up. That's one of my most fascinating episodes, because one, it's the reason he picked it was because he didn't think anyone would ever want to speak to him about it, and two, it was just so weird, and he was just so weird and just out there. And as much as I love when people pick like the more well-known albums that they kind of pick, like we've done, like I've covered stuff like Adele's 21, for example, and as much as that's been fascinating stuff, there's always like when someone picks, like when there's only like about 1,000 people who listen to it, like The Dig, for example. Right, there's something quite personal about that as well, and it's quite nice to be able to kind of find those niche things. So I always like the fact that despite there perhaps not being that much data, that the show is able to talk about, like, when someone picks Radiohead's OK Computer, for example, or Adele's 21, but then can pick some random Los Angeles comedian doing a Baby Voice dressed as a samurai, or a band that never made it. I think there's enough that the show is good enough, and I'm hoping that I can pull off the host aspect to try and get an hour and a half content out of it.
As the Dig episode was progressing, I'm like, oh man, I'm really not talking about the music as much as I should, but just the whole cultural aspect and the social aspect of being a band, and having, a good live set, a good recorded album, and they had a few albums, and then it just never really happening and the band disbanding. To me, that's fascinating. And it's funny because I feel myself wanting to talk about my band a lot. And I kept being like, no, don't talk about it. Don't talk about it. And then I saw you post like a day or two later about how it was your rule, what you love, not what you do. Like, always having to tell the musicians to not talk about
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm glad I was naturally censoring myself that way.
I think sometimes, I mean, with particularly with musicians, or because I've had episodes based that are connected through PR people and stuff, and
Yeah.
I think I had an episode at one point with a guy called Johnny Taylor, who's in a band called The Horn, and we spoke about Graceland by Paul Simon. And I said that I was like, oh, we might make a mention of the band and stuff, but I kind of want to focus on you as a thing on that. But sometimes if the album has a direct influence on some of their own work, I will touch upon that and how much it works, and I will ask them about how much has it influenced you and stuff.
Yeah.
And he actually went to goes, and he said to me, and he went to me, goes like, I've been kind of doing kind of interviews all day, and I've actually been quite looking forward to this one because it's a chance for me to not talk about myself, and it's nice to be able to have kind of some conversation and that stuff. And I took that, and like if I sometimes get the odd email from people saying, oh, this is so and so and so and so, they've done this and this. I'm like, oh, I would love to talk to them. However, I like them to talk about like less about their own stuff. And like, for example, like this is a show that if people want to talk about something else about themselves for a change, or if they want to break from talking about themselves, then yes, feel free. And I think I've had a couple of guests who've afterwards said that they kind of appreciate the kind of fact that they might be talking about themselves a lot more. They're not kind of trying to sell. They're not trying to like kind of sell themselves. They just kind of like get caught up in the conversation and stuff. And that's like one of the, I think. And as much as I'm very much a self-deprecating person, and self-deprecation is very much part of my brand. I will kind of, so yeah, a lot of my Instagram posts is very self-deprecating. But like hearing that, and I don't get that much in terms of negative comments, because I don't get that many comments anyway. The odd few I do have, but to hear kind of like saying that was nice to have a change, I was like, that's one of the best things I've had from that, and it's perhaps one of the reasons I'm still doing it. In that, like, one, like talking to people who have not met before, or like networking, like for example, like just like talking to a random person. Like for an hour or something a few times. I love that aspect of it, but also just being able to kind of offer that kind of space to like relax and kind of have like again, this is more about musicians that are on a PR thing or something, like to be able to not think about that and just have a kind of chat about what they want to chat about, and it kind of validates the original reason that I want to do the podcast. So yeah, and I felt like a warm fuzzy feeling hearing that.
Yeah, it's especially with podcasts, they're so, you can post on Instagram or wherever, but there's no direct interaction with your listeners because it's, audio only. There's no comment section necessarily. So it's so gratifying when people give you that feedback directly like that. And it's like, yes, it's worth it.
Yeah. Pick a Disc as well is, you've got some podcasts where you've got like the same kind of team that are just on their own doing the same thing in and out or doing stuff, and it's based on their personalities, and you get people that will listen to every single episode day in day out and stuff. I mean, I've got people like friends of mine who have openly said that they don't listen to every single episode of Pick a Disc because because perhaps they don't know the guest, or more importantly, they don't know the album. So I've had people that who say that they only listen to, like, if it's people that in the kind of podcast circles, like, they say, "Oh, I'll listen to so and so because it's so and so. I don't know the album," or if they don't know the guest but they know the album, they'll listen. So I've kind of like accepted that I'm probably not going to have like people that listen in day out. So I'm probably accepted that there's probably no one there who's listened to every single episode. But have listened to like the odd few. There's probably some that probably listen to more than less, or some that only listen to the odd few and stuff. But
Yeah.
I've come to peace with that very early on, because I think it is that kind of podcast. It's not one where you're following it, even though technically there is a kind of character arc with me, because with me kind of learning stuff about music, because I've always marketed myself, self-deprecating again. It's a very, very British thing of me marketing myself as the worst choice for a music podcaster, because I just know bugger all about music. But I've often kind of like been learning about all sorts of different things, or listening to like very famous albums for the first time that people are surprised I've never listened to before. So there is a kind of arc, but it's not one of those kind of shows.
Yeah, it's hard as a podcaster if you're not already a celebrity, like, or you're not doing like true crime where it's like, listen to the next episode for, So I think the, what we do, pick a disc, sound meet sound, I think these are important. And I definitely have people who listen to, most of the episodes. So I think it's cool. And yeah, it is one of those things where it's like, I'm not doing it for fame or money, or I'm doing it because I think it's important to talk to people about the things they love, and how their relationship with the art evolved and stuff. So and I think, with you, it's like, some of like Midnight Flowers, I'm not sure anyone's ever podcasted about that before. So that's kind of cool, like you're probably the only episode about that album. So.
Yeah, you type in Monotrona into Spotify, my episode is actually above the actual artist, and it's the only EP the only music that's released from the artist, and my podcast episode is above. Yeah, that's like the only time that's happened with that and stuff. But I love the fact that that's there, and like it's a space for. There's a space for that guest to be able to talk about that, because I kind of like that feeling.
Yeah, well, so we are reaching the end of our time, and this has been such a cool talk. I'm so fascinated. I'm like good with spreadsheets, but I can't do pivot tables, so I'm just so fascinated for like SQL.
Yeah.
But so I had one other question on my list, and I feel bad asking anyone this kind of question because it's hard to choose, but like, is there a performance like that stands out to you, like a gig you've gone to that's like, this was the best ever gig, or like, one of the 5 best ever gigs I've been to, or anything like that? Or is that too broad a question?
I can think of one that jumps into my head. There's a few, but like, I think sometimes when people say this kind of thing, they use the gun to head choose one. Like, who's your it's like who's your favorite child, and they go, I can't pick, and I'm like, even though I know for a fact that every parent probably goes, they could easily pick one. They just don't want to insult the other ones. But now
Right.
there's a few, but the one that jumps into my mind straight away is, and let me just get the date for you because I do have it. Yes, on the 8th of May 2011, there was a kind of Irish kind of indie pop band called Fight Like Apes. I kind of discovered them more or less around the same time I discovered quite a few of my favourite bands. Like back in the time when I found iTunes and stuff, they're kind of like a scrappy kind of indie band with guitars and synths and keyboards and stuff. They played, I think, like the smallest room in the O2 Academy in Birmingham, the Academy 3. It's a very small room and stuff, but for a £7 ticket they ended up being on stage for about an hour and 20 minutes, pretty much playing through every single song that they probably ever released at the time. They only had 2 albums. Wow. They pretty much sung pretty much like majority of an EP as well. I can't remember much of I can't remember much of it, but I do remember like bits and pieces of it. I remember kind of just wanting to be the keyboardist, keyboardist at one point. But yeah, it was just so energetic, so kind of like frantic, and like the crowd were all into it. I remember walking out just being covered in sweat at that point. My voice would like shot. I think my ears were ringing well because this was like I think it's about a year before I decided to wear the earplugs.
That's smart.
The the noise filtering earplugs as well. So I'm still a year away from wearing them at pretty much every gig I've been to. So walking out, ears ringing for about 2 days afterwards, going like, "That's like the best damn thing I've ever seen, like the best thing I've ever seen." But yeah, that was and I think I was at another gig about 4 days later, being a band called Slow Club, which is another one of my favorite bands at the time. But yeah, walked out of that gig going like, that was like transcendent, and I think like you kind of hear or read stories or kind of thought experiments about if you could time travel and go and revisit certain gigs or anything or moments or anything like that. Which one would you go to? I'd go to that one. That was like my 10th gig ever. Now I'm on the verge of cracking at 600 by January next year.
Wow.
So I'll be at 600.
So cool.
So I'll be at 600 by the time of next year. So nearly about like almost 14 and a half years after. My memory of it was just like transcendent. I thought they were brilliant. The amount of energy the energy they had, frantic, chaotic kind of noise that they just unleashed. I just really wish I could remember more of it.
Sometimes those transcendent experiences, they reach a part of your brain that is not easy to use memory recall on. And like the whole time travel thing, it's like a lot of it is like who you were in that moment, so I do think the late 2000s, early 2010s was a magical time for live music. Some of my favorite gigs are from that time. And that's why I realized in hindsight I chose Midnight Flowers, not so much for the album. I love the album, but because of the effect that band had on me live, which it was like a transcendent, one of those things where the whole audience is in sync,
I do wonder though, say for example, because Los Campesinos now pretty much have a kind of second wind. They've gathered like a new generation of fans, so they've got 16 to 16-year-olds that are now like loving the band, and like their tour last year, like sold out. It's sold like their biggest ever tour last year. They're like, probably more popular than they've ever been in terms of the fan base and stuff. And I did actually think about that. Like, say, if that time travel thing was very much in vogue and stuff, I can imagine, like, people, the fan base of Los Campesinos, like, descending onto, like, the first Los Campesinos gig in, like, this tiny little Cardiff, Wales little venue, like, playing the songs and and the band going, why? Okay. The band looking around going, like, how the hell does everyone seem to know the words to all these songs? And this is our first ever gig. But you can do that with pretty much any other band, like any other band. Like if you probably have all the famous ones, like I don't know, like people going to like the Beatles, going back to the Cavern Club and watching the Beatles and going like John and going like, how do they all know the words to our songs? Like
Well, that's a great way to end the podcast. Time travel.
Yeah.